March 18, 1944, Recklen Test Airfield, Germany. The captured P-47 Thunderbolt sat alone on the concrete, like a heavyweight boxer who had wandered into the wrong corner of the ring. Its olive-drab skin was scarred by flak and small arms fire, yet the aircraft looked stubbornly intact, almost defiant. German ground crews had painted black crosses over the American stars, but the airplane still felt foreign, too large, too brutal, too confident. Major Wilhelm Fryer, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots, walked a slow circle around it for the third time that morning. He had flown nearly every fighter Germany possessed: the elegant Bf-109, the aggressive Fw-190, even experimental aircraft few pilots would ever see. Nothing prepared him for this. The Thunderbolt was enormous. Empty weight, nearly 8,000 pounds, twice that of a Messerschmitt 109. Its fuselage was thick, blunt, unapologetic. Where German fighters were blades, this was a hammer. The aircraft had been captured intact 2 weeks earlier after Second Lieutenant William Maines, low on fuel, belly-landed in a French field. He destroyed his gun sight, but not the airplane. German patrols arrived stunned by their luck. Now Berlin wanted answers. Colonel Hans Schmidt, head of the Recklen evaluation program, watched silently as Fryer climbed into the cockpit. Schmidt had lost 30 pilots in 2 months, many to Thunderbolts. He needed to understand why. Fryer immediately noticed the armor. 2 inches of hardened steel behind the pilot's seat. The Bf-109 carried barely 8 millimeters. The instrument panel looked more like a bomber's than a fighter's. Oversized gauges, heavy switches, systems built to survive damage. When Fryer started the engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp exploded into life with a violence that shook the airframe. 2,000 horsepower roared from a radial engine that sounded less like machinery and more like weather. German engines were refined. This one was savage. The first flight was cautious. At full throttle, the Thunderbolt accelerated slowly at first, then surged forward with relentless force. The takeoff run was long, but once airborne, the aircraft climbed like it had been released from gravity. 3,000 feet per minute. At altitudes where the 109 began to weaken, the Thunderbolt's turbocharger was just reaching its stride. At 30,000 feet, Fryer pushed the aircraft into hard turns. It responded without complaint. Back on the ground, the pilots waited for his verdict. These were men who had survived Poland, France, Britain, Russia. They knew aircraft. Fryer finally spoke. "This thing," he said quietly, "is not a fighter in the way we understand fighters. It is a weapon system." 3 days later, they examined the guns. 8 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, 800 rounds per minute per gun, over 3,400 rounds total. They staged a test. A derelict truck was placed 200 yards downrange. Fryer fired a 1-second burst. The sound was continuous, mechanical, merciless. When the dust settled, the truck no longer resembled a vehicle. The engine block had split. The frame twisted apart. Metal fragments lay scattered 50 yards in every direction. In 1 second, over 100 rounds had left the wings. More than half had hit. The room was silent. A Messerschmitt crossing that gun pattern for 1 second would absorb 50 to 60 impacts. No fighter structure in the Luftwaffe could survive that. This wasn't precision combat. It was industrialized destruction. And the Thunderbolt could keep firing for nearly 40 seconds. The realization settled heavily over the room. German fighters were built for duels, speed, agility, the perfect cannon shot. The Thunderbolt was built for a different war entirely. A war of factories, not knights. And Germany was already losing it. The evaluations at Recklen continued for weeks, and each day stripped away another illusion. The German pilots had hoped to find a weakness, a fatal flaw that clever tactics or superior flying skill could exploit. Instead, they found a system designed to erase mistakes, forgive inexperience, and punish anyone who challenged it. Captain Erich Hartmann, already a legend among fighter pilots, stood beneath the Thunderbolt's wings studying the gun ports. 8 of them, perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced. "Our cannon hit harder," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "But they don't hit often enough." Major Fryer nodded. "And they don't hit together." The Thunderbolt's guns weren't meant to score a single decisive strike. They were designed to saturate space. When a P-47 pilot pressed the trigger. He didn't send one projectile toward a target. He sent a wall. A moving sheet of steel traveling nearly 2,800 feet per second, converging on a rectangle of sky where an enemy fighter happened to exist. German cannon doctrine emphasized precision. One perfect burst, one clean kill. The Thunderbolt didn't care about perfection. It cared about probability. If enough metal passed through the same volume of air, something vital would be hit. And with 8 guns firing at once, that probability approached certainty. They ran mock engagements next. At 300 miles per hour, a Messerschmitt crossing the Thunderbolt's firing cone at a 90-degree angle would remain inside the kill zone for just over 1 second. 1 second was all the Thunderbolt needed. The Messerschmitt's lighter construction, once an advantage, became a liability. Wings failed. Engines disintegrated. Control cables vanished. More disturbing still was the Thunderbolt's ability to absorb damage. Battle reports were spread across a long table inside the hangar. One aircraft returned with 3 cylinders shot off its engine. Another flew home with half its tail shredded. One collided with a German fighter, lost 4 feet of wing, and still landed safely. The conclusion was unavoidable. Unless the pilot or engine was completely destroyed, the Thunderbolt often stayed airborne. And German pilots rarely got a second chance. New tactics were proposed. Never dive with a Thunderbolt, it would follow and overtake. Never flee straight and level, the guns would reach you. Never assume a damaged Thunderbolt was finished, it almost never was. The only hope was to attack from below, where the pilot's view was limited, strike once, and disengage immediately. Even then, survival depended more on luck than skill. By late April, reports from the front confirmed what Rechlin had discovered. American pilots were learning fast. Early in the year, many Thunderbolt pilots fired too early, wasted ammunition, and broke off attacks prematurely. That phase ended quickly. Training films circulated. Gun camera footage was studied. Engagements were analyzed frame by frame. Air combat was becoming data-driven. On April 24th, Lieutenant Klaus Muller, one of the test pilots, encountered Thunderbolts over Hanover. His formation was already at a disadvantage. Lower altitude, less fuel, fewer aircraft. The Americans attacked from above, diving at terrifying speed. Mueller saw tracers streaking toward him from distances German doctrine considered impossible. His wingmen vanished, not exploding, not burning, simply torn apart. 1 second they were aircraft. The next they were fragments. He survived by diving hard, pulling the Thunderbolt past him, then reversing. The American pilot didn't chase. He didn't need to. He extended, climbed back to altitude, and waited. That patience defined the new air war. The Thunderbolts never rushed. They never forced fights. They simply controlled the sky until the German pilots made a mistake or ran out of fuel. When they attacked, they did so with overwhelming force. 8 guns, multiple aircraft, 1 target. 15 minutes later, of 12 Messerschmitts, 5 returned. The psychological effect was devastating. Veteran pilots, men who had flown since Spain, found themselves hunted by opponents who didn't need to be better. They only needed to be adequate. The Thunderbolt carried enough armor, firepower, speed, and altitude performance to compensate for almost anything its pilot lacked. Industrial warfare had arrived in the sky. Major Fryer continued flying the captured Thunderbolt, briefing pilots who would face it in combat. But increasingly, the lessons felt academic. Knowing how the aircraft worked did not make it survivable. Understanding its advantages did not neutralize them. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, one of the engineers who helped analyze the guns, was killed on May 28th. For seconds of fire, his Messerschmitt burned all the way to the ground. On June 6th, the invasion began. The Thunderbolts came in waves, endless, relentless. Over Normandy, they ruled the air completely. Any aircraft that rose was attacked. Any vehicle that moved was destroyed. The Luftwaffe flew when it could, died often, and achieved almost nothing. The numbers became absurd. 10 American aircraft for every German. Sometimes 20. Every American fighter carried more firepower than anything Germany could field. This was no longer a contest of skill. It was arithmetic. Major Wilhelm Fryer flew his last combat mission on June 18, 1944. It was not in the captured Thunderbolt that had taught him so much, but in his own Messerschmitt, a machine he had once believed represented the pinnacle of aerial combat. The mission was a dawn reconnaissance sweep over the invasion beaches. For BF-109s lifted off into pale morning light, engines straining even as they climbed. They had been airborne for barely 12 minutes when the Thunderbolts found them. Fryer saw the Americans first, high, eastward, silhouettes edged in gold by the rising sun. 8 aircraft, possibly more. The number hardly mattered. He ordered an immediate dive, hoping terrain and speed might buy escape. It didn't. The Thunderbolts were already rolling into attack. The sound reached him before the bullets. That unmistakable tearing roar, 8 guns firing in unison, multiplied across the formation. The sky didn't feel empty anymore. It felt solid. Fryer's wingman disappeared in a fireball. Not damaged. Not crippled. Gone. At 50 feet above the ground, Fryer hauled his aircraft into a maximum G-turn. Trees blurred past his wingtips. One Thunderbolt overshot, forced to climb to avoid plowing into the earth. For 2 seconds, Fryer had a chance. He could reverse, try for a shot. He didn't. He ran. Full throttle, hugging the terrain, never flying straight for more than a heartbeat. Behind him, the Americans worked like shepherds, taking turns, herding rather than chasing. Every attempt to climb was crushed. Every attempt to turn for home was cut off. They waited for the mistake. It came 12 minutes later. Fryer misjudged a rise in the ground and climbed just 50 feet to clear it. That was enough. A half-second burst, maybe 50 rounds. 12 struck home. The engine died instantly. Oil sprayed across the canopy. Instruments shattered. 2 rounds passed through the cockpit, missing his head by inches. He bailed out, landing hard in a wheat field as the Thunderbolts circled once, then departed westward. Of the 4 aircraft that took off that morning, only 1 returned. Across Normandy that day, dozens of German fighters fell. The Americans lost 1, to flak. The pilot survived. This was the mathematics of the air war in 1944. By July, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force in the West. Thunderbolts no longer escorted bombers. They became flying artillery, ranging freely ahead of advancing armies. Trains vanished. Convoys burned. Tanks lost optics, tracks, crews. Any movement in daylight invited annihilation. German pilots joked bitterly. If you see silver aircraft, they're American. If you see none, that's the Luftwaffe. Colonel Schmidt's final report admitted what no one in Berlin wanted to say outright. Conventional fighters could no longer compete. Air superiority over Western Europe was lost. Permanently. Captain Hartmann, one of Germany's finest, died on July 20th, caught by 4 Thunderbolts. 6 seconds of fire. Nothing remained to bury. The captured P-47 continued flying at Rechlin until August, when retreating forces destroyed it to prevent recapture. It had taught its lessons well. Over 100 German pilots flew it. Most were dead within 6 months. Knowing the Thunderbolt's strengths did not save them. You cannot out-tactic overwhelming firepower. You cannot outfly industrial supremacy. Fryer survived the war. Years later, he told his son about flying the captured American fighter, about how it felt less like piloting an aircraft and more like aiming a force of nature. The Thunderbolt didn't demand brilliance. It demanded discipline. It transformed average pilots into lethal ones and rendered exceptional skill almost irrelevant. The war changed, he said, and we did not. By 1945, more than 15,000 Thunderbolts had been built. They fired over 135 million rounds, destroyed thousands of aircraft, and pulverized what remained of German resistance. The Messerschmitt 109, elegant, agile, deadly in another age, became obsolete not because it was badly designed, but because it belonged to a world where individual excellence still mattered. That world ended in the roar of 8 machine guns. In a letter written in May 1944, Fryer captured the truth better than any report. We have seen the enemy's new fighter. It is not merely a machine. It is a factory with wings, a democracy of destruction. Our beautiful aircraft are matchsticks before a blowtorch. The war in the air is already over. We are simply the last to understand it. The Thunderbolt was not a miracle weapon. It was something far more dangerous. It was good enough, built in vast numbers, and used with relentless efficiency. And that was enough to end an era and an air force.